You're listening to Protecting What Matters by the Ohio Department of Commerce. Commerce is Ohio's chief regulator, and we play a vital role in keeping you safe by protecting your property, your money, and some of the products you use every day. This is designed to bring awareness to important issues and help educate consumers and businesses. Join us as we chat with trusted industry experts focused on providing you with the tools you need to help you protect what matters most in your life.
Oftentimes, the operators are more than willing to work with families in trying to resolve any issues that there may be without having to involve the division. So we would definitely encourage everyone to speak with the cemetery management first. But if that doesn't resolve the issue, our complaint process is very easy.
You're listening to Protecting What Matters. I'm your host, Brandon Klein at the Ohio Department of Commerce. We're going to talk about cemeteries and the role commerce plays in regulating them or not. For this edition, Laura Monick, our Cemetery Registration and Resolution Chief within our Real Estate and Professional Licensing Division, will help you know what to do when you visit your loved one's grave or burial. Thanks for joining me, Laura.
Thank you for having me, Brandon.
To start off with, how does the department regulate cemeteries? And also including what don't we oversee in cemeteries that people might think we do?
So we register cemeteries in the state of Ohio, and that includes any cemetery that's conducting burials. And we have a couple big exemptions to the registration requirement. The first being any cemetery that has not had a burial in more than 25 years. So typically people may say those are the historical or pioneer type cemeteries. They are exempt from our registration process. And then our other exemption is for family cemeteries. And family cemeteries are any that 3/4 of the people interred in the cemetery are related by a common ancestor. And so we wouldn't maintain any information or registration information for those cemeteries. A big question that we often get are people that are doing genealogical searches for their families, and the division does not maintain individual burial records. That's something that the person would need to call each cemetery about, because the cemetery should have that burial information. We also have the Ohio Cemetery Dispute Resolution Commission, and they hear complaints against any cemetery that we have registered or that is required to be registered.
Given all that, so how many cemeteries does a department oversee or register?
So we currently have just over 4,100 cemeteries registered with us. And part of our registration is identifying kind of what type of cemetery they are. And so we have three main categories of cemeteries. The biggest, which is almost 35 or 75% of the registered cemeteries, are operated by political subdivisions. So those are going to be your township cemeteries, cities, or villages. Our smallest group of registered cemeteries are less than 10%, and they are operated by a company or an association. And then our other group of registered cemeteries are the religious, benevolent, or fraternal organization cemeteries.
So what are some of the most common kinds of complaints that the department usually addresses?
So probably the biggest complaint that we receive involves the maintenance of cemeteries. So we may get complaints about the mowing and trimming that is maybe not happening in the cemetery, or maintenance of roadways or fencing, things like that. We had, one complaint that we recently took concerning roads. There were a lot of large potholes in the cemetery, along with mud that was washing onto the roadway when there were heavy rains. And so the person filed a complaint, and we worked with the operator to try to resolve some of that roadway maintenance issue. And the commission, at the first meeting, they heard the complaint, requested that the cemetery kind of provide a written plan for the work that they were going to be completing, and also include both before and after pictures of the roadway so that we could see that the work had been completed. And so the cemetery actually did multiple things within the cemetery to try to fix the problem. One was that runoff from drainage, so they cleared all their drains out. They filled in the potholes that you could visibly see in the cemetery, and then waited until there was another rain. And when there was another rain, they identified other areas on the roadway that they needed to fix where there was ponding. And so the commission can hear a complaint multiple times. So if they don't resolve it, or there's ongoing maintenance work that needs to be completed to help resolve an issue, they'll hear it at multiple meetings. They meet quarterly, and so they'll continue that case and hear it again at the next meeting to ensure that the work was done. And ultimately, this cemetery included maps of the cemetery, highlighted where they did the work, included those pictures so that the commissioners were certain that the issue with the roadway was resolved. Another complaint that we frequently see involve decoration policies in the cemeteries and their rules and regulations. So in a cemetery, they often have rules and regulations that speak to what is allowed in the cemetery or not permitted. And it includes, hours of operation, what their memorialization is permitted, if there may be an upright monument or it's a flat marker area. And it also includes those decoration policies, because there can be a lot of do's and don'ts for the decorations within each particular cemetery, and that can vary across the state by cemetery. And so we will hear complaints, and one in particular, we actually received multiple complaints against the same cemetery because of the decoration policy and also because of the rules and regulations. The cemetery had rules and regulations in place that they were not following and enforcing in the cemetery, and then the cemetery decided that they needed to start enforcing those rules for the safety of the people in the cemetery and for their staff. And people were upset by that. And so there was a lot of discussion about what was permitted and not permitted. And when the complaints went in front of the commission took some time to explain what some of their policies were in their own cemeteries and the reasoning behind some of those regulations, including allowing only fresh cut flowers during the mowing season, or how long they may allow decorations to stay on graves after, special holidays. And then the commission also talked to the cemetery about how they proceeded moving forward with enforcing their rules and regulations. And the commission made multiple recommendations to the cemetery. And one important thing is when the cemetery starts to enforce rules that are either new or hadn't been enforced before, that there should be about a 6-month transition period where the cemetery really communicates out to family members what is going to be changing or updating. And the commissioners recommend that the cemetery post that information around the cemetery, especially at the entrances where people are coming and going. And then also if they have websites or social media accounts, that the cemeteries put that information out that they're going to start enforcing certain rules. The commission also recommends that the cemetery really work on communicating with the families this important information, because oftentimes families are putting out statues or other figurines, shepherd hooks, things like that. And so the cemetery wants to make sure that they're communicating those policies. And if they're cleaning up those items from the grave, the commission really encouraged the cemetery to create a place that when they clean those decorations off the graves, they're stored so that families can come and pick those up from the cemetery instead of having those decorations thrown away.
Thanks for listening to Protecting What Matters. Cryptocurrency continues to be in the news given the multi-billion-dollar collapse in mid-November of the crypto exchange known as FTX. Our Division of Securities attorney, John Christ, reminds you that investing in cryptocurrency products can be risky.
And so if you are getting involved into a cryptocurrency investment, you need to be aware that it's oftentimes not based on, the valuation is oftentimes not based on the cash flow being produced, but in reality it's just being based on some appreciation of the price that you hope will happen and may not. So it gets back to, we want people to be aware of the risks of these investments and be aware of what they're getting themselves into before they get into it.
For more information and tips on investing, visit com.ohio.gov/securities.
Thanks for listening to Protecting What Matters from the Ohio Department of Commerce. We are your resource for all safety information for your home or business. Here's a quick safety message reminder from the Ohio State Fire Marshal's office.
So smoke alarms, we want to make sure we're putting those on each level of the house. Each bedroom that you're at, where anybody sleeps, put that inside that bedroom, and then outside where the people sleep. They're important because what you typically have is that early activation, early notification of something happening, in this case smoke building up, and that usually is what tells you that there's a fire happening. So having those placed in those locations that are appropriate, making sure that you're checking the alarms themselves about once a month just to make sure that they're working. Change the batteries on them, we like to say twice a year right now. And then after 10 years, those entire alarms are going to need replaced.
For more information on the State Fire Marshal, visit our website at com.ohio.gov/fire. And be sure to check out some of our previous podcast episodes on all podcast platforms.
Welcome back to Protecting What Matters. I'm Brandon Klein, and we're talking about cemeteries with Laura Monick, our Cemetery Registration and Resolution Chief at the Department of Commerce. Laura, we were talking last segment about cemetery complaints, and how many cemetery complaints does the department receive on average each year?
Yep, so it can actually vary pretty widely. We average around, I would say, about 40 per year. However, in 2022, we actually saw 57 complaints come into the division during the year. So it can depend, and sometimes that may mean we have, as I mentioned in the previous segment, we had 8 complaints against the same cemetery, so that may increase our numbers when multiple families are making complaints against the same cemetery.
And what days, months, or weeks do you typically receive the most complaints each year, and why is that the case?
So our quiet period for taking in complaints is probably the winter, which there are less people out in the cemeteries. The weather's bad, they may not be traveling, so it's quieter during the winter, and the season really starts to pick up in the spring, especially around Mother's Day and then Memorial Day. The grass is growing, it's warm out, and especially for Memorial Day when people are wanting to honor those who passed away in past wars and in service to our country. We see a lot more complaints start up around that time. And so it stays pretty busy during the summer, and another time, and not necessarily a day or a month, but rainy seasons. If we're receiving a lot of rain somewhere in Ohio over an extended period of time, we may see complaints increase just because it's harder for the cemeteries to get out to mow if it's muddy. And also we may be seeing drainage issues, and people may complain about ponding in the cemetery.
A lot of good information there. How can consumers file a complaint? What's the process like, and how long does it take to hear back from the division?
So the first thing, if someone calls into the division asking about filing a complaint, we usually ask or encourage them to speak with the cemetery first. Oftentimes the operators are more than willing to work with families in trying to resolve any issues that there may be without having to involve the division. So we would definitely encourage everyone to speak with the cemetery management first. But if that doesn't resolve the issue, our complaint process is very easy. Our complaint form is located on our website, and we also can send it out via mail or email, whatever's easier for someone, and it gets filled out and returned to the division. And within about 7 days, sometimes less, the division will open up the complaint. We provide notice to the person that filed the complaint, just letting them know that we received it, we've opened it up, and that we've notified the cemetery. And So at the same time, we're notifying the cemetery of the complaint and what the complaint's about. And that cemetery then has 30 days to file a response to the division to the complaint. And so we will then work with the parties and see if we can't resolve the complaint beforehand. If we're not successful in resolving a complaint just between the parties, then that will go in front of the commission, which we've already talked about a little bit, but it's a commission of 9 people. 7 are cemetery operators in the state with extensive experience in operating and managing cemeteries. And then we also have 2 public members. And so that commission meets quarterly, and they will hear the complaint and try to work with both the cemetery and the person that filed the complaint to resolve the issue. And the commission may also make recommendations on best practices to the cemetery or suggestions on, especially if we have a maintenance complaint, on how they may have, dealt with that same issue in their own cemetery and how they've resolved it.
It's your money, come and claim it. The Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Unclaimed Funds is currently safeguarding more than $3 billion in unclaimed funds. So there's a good chance you or someone you know has money waiting to be claimed. Just head over to our website, unclaimedfunds.ohio.gov, to search your name, the name of a family member, or a loved one to see if you have an unclaimed fund.
Thank you for listening to Protecting What Matters from the Ohio Department of Commerce. And we hope you'll check out our summer safety episode, where we take on all things grilling, camping, and outdoor related.
When we're doing grilling and we're outside and just generally enjoying being out and about, the best thing to do is to make sure you're keeping yourself safe, keeping your family safe, friends safe. And ways to do that is to make sure you're keeping that grill away from anything that can burn. So we want to keep it about 10 feet away from houses or any other structure. And it's just one of those common sense things that we take for granted. I don't know how many times that I, as a firefighter, have come up on a house where somebody's melted their siding because they left their grill right up against the side of that house, and they just opened up their lid and they had a little bit of flame coming out, and it overheated and melted that siding.
For more summer safety tips, check out com.ohio.gov/fire.
Welcome back to Protecting What Matters. I'm Brandon Klein, and we're talking about cemeteries with Laura Monick, our Cemetery Registration and Resolution Chief at the Department of Commerce. Laura, aside from resolving complaints, what are some of the other ways Commerce interacts with cemeteries?
Sure. So beyond the complaints that we take in registering the cemeteries, I talked about what types of cemeteries that we register, and one of those groups was the company or association cemeteries, and some of those are maybe required to maintain trust accounts for money, either for the perpetual maintenance of the cemetery or for any sales of pre-need merchandise and services that they do. And we have an external auditor at the division that does audit all of those trust accounts across the state to ensure that the cemeteries are following the law with regard to the trust accounts, depositing the money that they're required to deposit and only withdrawing what they're allowed to by law. So that's one way. And then the other way is a little bit newer. We're in our 5th year of the cemetery grant program. And that is a really great program for cemeteries that are registered with the division to apply for grants every year for different projects that they may need to have done within those cemeteries.
What are some examples of the grant money and how it's used?
So the grant program was set up kind of to handle 2 categories of grant requests. The first being what's termed exceptional maintenance. And a lot of people always ask, what is exceptional maintenance? And that's going to be something above their everyday to-day operations. So it will not cover the cost of the mowing and trimming of the cemetery, but it's going to cover larger projects, especially ones that may not be in their budget or within their capacity to complete on their own. It can include projects regarding, removing trees, fixing monuments or headstones that maybe are falling over or in disrepair, It could include replacing fences, fixing fences. We've had a lot of cemeteries, because they've been in existence for so very long. A lot of them operate with only paper records. And so we have had a lot of cemeteries request grant funds to move from paper records and move to a cemetery software program. Then we also have roads, which we talked about. That was one of the complaints we discussed earlier. And we've had a lot of road projects that were completed. One in particular was a cemetery that had expanded into a new section in around 2010, and they had put down a gravel road at the time. And when they applied for the grant project, they sent in pictures. A lot of grass and weeds had started to kind of grow into that gravel, and it settled in, and it really didn't look like a roadway anymore. And they wanted to kind of redo the driveway so that people knew it was a driveway and they could go back there safely. And they also weren't, driving over in any areas that they shouldn't be driving in. So that project, they actually put down a new gravel driveway, and it was a pretty successful project. The other part of the grant program offers trainings, and there's two ways that they can use money from the grant to do training. They can either send their staff to a training about cemetery operations and maintenance, or they can actually host a training. And we had a city that applied for a grant and was awarded the project, where they offered volunteers and their cemetery staff, and they actually also opened up the training to other cemeteries in the area on cleaning monuments and also doing some minor repairs. So they had, I think, about 30 people attend from the area that were given the opportunity to learn how to do that. And that really helps out the cemetery, because they have more people that may be available to help them if they don't have the manpower. And it also helped other area cemeteries that were able to learn as well. So that was a really great project that we saw that involved the training aspect.
And in previous years, the division has made an appearance at doing some check presentations to acknowledge the moment. And I know you've gone on some of these presentations. What's it like to see how these local groups receive the money?
It's really exciting, and it's very rewarding to see where the grant money is going. We get to meet and hear their personal stories from the operators themselves. Oftentimes, they're people that have grown up in the area that may likely have family at that cemetery. And so it's nice to have that personal side of what's happening in the cemeteries, and to see how much everyone cares about maintaining their cemeteries in the best possible manner. And it's also nice, sometimes we have a grant project that may be completed just as we're arriving to do a grant presentation. They'll receive their funds ahead of time, and so there's been once or twice where we've actually been able to see the completed project in person, and that's always really exciting too.
Of course, the most important question is, how can cemeteries apply?
So our grants are opened every year for application. So we have the application is all online, and we announce the grant award period. It will go out on our website, so we'll announce that, and then we'll also send out, we have an email stakeholder list that people can sign up for, and they will be emailed a notification that the grant period has opened for applications. Those typically open around July 1st of every year, and this coming grant period will actually open June 30th. And so those grant notices go out to everyone, and they can make their application. We try to leave the application period open for at least 30 days, just to allow people time to gather all the information that they're going to need. And then if they run into any questions, they can always reach out to the division via email or telephone so that we can help them. And then they will have the opportunity to apply for the grant.
Well, thanks for joining us for this segment, Laura. And that's all we have for this edition of Protecting What Matters. You can find more information about cemeteries at the department's website at com.ohio.gov/real. That's REAL. Thanks for listening.